20. Kufika 2019 hii sheria imerudi, imewekwa mfuko na watu ambao tupili ya kina nani. Nikisema hivyo ninasema ni kwa sababu tulikuwa na ofisi ya NCCC yenye ilikuwa inaongozwa na Eden Wachu, na ikalipa watu pesa na ikafanya kazi nzuri sana, ikazunguka nchi mzima ikileta cohesion. Lakini it's unfortunate, hata kabla kazi ya ijaisha hiyo ofisi iliweza kufungwa. Saa hizi mkienda mtapata hiyo ofisi imefungwa, haifanyi kazi ya waathiriwa ndani kwa ndani, na ila hii ni sheria ya Kenya.
Welcome back to Zile Tales. Today we're delving into a topic often overlooked in mainstream media: the internally displaced people, IDPs, of Kenya following the 2007-2008 post-election violence. In 2007, Kenya experienced one of its darkest chapters in recent history. Following disputed presidential elections, violence erupted across the country, leading to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people from their homes. While much attention was paid to the political turmoil, the plight of the IDPs has largely faded from public consciousness. Today, we aim to shed light on their stories. Violence after the 2007 general elections. The Waki Commission, which was formed in 2008 to investigate the circumstances that led to the post-election violence, noted the role of historical land conflicts. According to the Commission's findings, much of the violence was planned, and tribal gangs were used to expel opponents from their communities. Politicians contributed to the violence through ethnic incitement, and the media was accused of fueling violence by broadcasting hate speech, especially through vernacular radio stations, which broadcast in languages other than English and Swahili. The former President Uhuru Kenyatta and current President William Ruto were charged for crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court, though their cases were terminated due to insufficient evidence. The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Fatou Bensouda, complained that the Kenyan government was not willing to cooperate by providing crucial documents. So what is next for the victims? The role of the Kenyan government. There have been various efforts by the government to compensate victims of the 2007 post-election violence, but many have yet to receive compensation more than 10 years later. After the peace accord of February 2008 that marked the end of conflict, the government launched an operation on May 5, 2008 dubbed Rudi Nyumbani, meaning return home, with the goal to return people who had fled or were displaced from their homes during the post-election violence. The resettlement process was not successful due to a lack of consultation between the victims and the government, poor profiling of IDPs, corruption, tribalism, and funding issues. The government failed to build promised houses due to insufficient funds. Instead, it settled for giving victims $100, which was not a large amount to open a new chapter in their lives. In October 2012, the Kenyan Parliament passed the Prevention, Protection and Assistance to Internally Displaced Persons and Affected Communities Act 2012, which is in line with the UN Basic Principles and Guidelines of Gross Violations of International Law. The new act requires the government to create a database of IDPs and consult IDPs on relevant laws. It also penalized anyone found guilty of masquerading as an IDP. In March 2015, the president launched a restorative fund with 10 billion Kenya shillings, more than 80 million USD, to assist victims of the post-election violence. However, as of yet, the victims have not benefited because of delays in the release of the money. Michael Ndungu, Director of National Values and National Cohesion in the Office of the President, noted there was no clear policy of reparation to implement funding and the government was trying to find a solution. The government announced that it had set aside 6 billion Kenya shillings for 900,000 victims who had been missed in the profiling exercise in 2007. The chairman of the National IDPs Coordination Committee, Sheikh Adan Wachu, noted that they will be compensated after their status is verified, but the strategy the government will use to reach all the victims was unclear. Moving forward, poor profiling, ensuring that the right people were targeted for help in 2007 complicated the resettlement process. IDP issues in Kenya are complex. Some who had been displaced following the 1992 and 1997 elections are still seeking justice today. In 2009, the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission was formed to investigate human rights violations by the state since independence, including the 2007 violence. The 2,210-page report was delivered to the president, but the implementation of the report has been very slow due to a lack of political goodwill. The government needs a clear reparation policy which provides a framework for compensating IDPs. These difficulties of past efforts show that profiling exercise should be timely, all parties must be included, and compensation must be provided nationally at the same time. The findings of the TJRC report should also be implemented in order to put the violence and displacement in the past. And finally, to deal with a potent cause of violence, the National Land Commission should also work to resolve pending historical land disputes and come up with a timeline to finalize and offer solution to these cases. There is also an important role to be played by groups outside of the government and those directly affected. Civil rights organizations should be active in empowering IDPs, both in Kenya and around the world, to know and demand their rights and seek legal redress. The media also has a role to play. It has important agenda-setting powers, and it can highlight the continuing plight of the victims to encourage government action. This should not only happen when elections are coming. Organizations and activists continue to advocate for the rights of IDPs, calling for greater government support and international solidarity. However, much more needs to be done to ensure their voices are heard and their rights are upheld. As we reflect on the events of the past and the challenges of the present, let us not forget the resilience and strength of the internally displaced people of Kenya. Their stories must not be forgotten, and their struggles must not be ignored. Together, let's stand in solidarity with them as they strive for a brighter future. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Until next time, take care.